Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Today I want to talk about the Saturn-Uranus square. It's been spoken about quite a lot through myself and others as well. However, I just want to bring in the bigger picture of what's really going on here. And it has been touched on and discussed in different ways through different people, but I've been reflecting on it a lot naturally because of the current circumstances in this 3D reality, which are extremely challenging to say the very least. So here's the way to really put it into the bigger picture and context of what's actually unfolding relative to Saturn and Uranus specifically, which in a nutshell is systems, governments, structures, form versus humanity, the people, freedom, etc. Right? It's literally the battle between those ends of the spectrum. Saturn, of course, representing the consensus, state, authority, etc., and Uranus representing freedom, individuation, and awakening. We're in the greatest times of awakening without question. So what we need to think about, what I'll first do is I'll just bring up the chart so that we can actually look at this visually. I've been looking at Grace's national chart as well, by the way. I'm going to do a video on that as well. There's a couple of charts for Grace. Sorry, just a sidetrack, but there's a couple of charts for Grace. And most of you, well, some of you may be aware there's, virtually all of Grace is on fire at the moment. And so I've got family there and many of you live there. Many of you have family there as well. It's really very, very distressing, actually, what's going on there. I know there are fires also going on I think it's in California, some aspects of California. I know that there's fires in Turkey and Italy as well. So we're really facing very severe cataclysmic transitions that come through a lot of pain and suffering. Which will ultimately lead to better things. And even though it's so hard to keep sight of that at the moment, believe me, I understand, because I feel exactly the same. So here is the chart for today, and I won't bring up the charts necessarily for what I'm going to point to, but you should be able to kind of follow along with what I'm speaking to. So there's Uranus in Taurus, and here is Saturn in Aquarius, and naturally they are still square each other. And again, they will be square each other for the rest of this year. There'll be one more Passover to go relative to the aspect becoming exact, which is basically at the end of this year. So we've still got, really a good 5 months or so of very severe events still taking place. Now, that being said, here's what I want to show you. Now, some of you may be able to read this, some of you maybe not. That's okay. Let me just, I will walk you through it, so it's fine. So what I've done here is I've just asked Solarfire to show me what I really want to see is the square, the conjunction, and the opposition. Okay, any squares, well, first of all, conjunction, square, and opposition, followed by another square, followed by another conjunction. So Saturn and Uranus are in a square aspect at the moment, okay? This particular square at the moment is called a last quarter square. And so where this begins is actually at this point here, okay? Forget about what it says. If you look at this first line on the screen, on this window that my cursor is pointing to, you will see there's the symbol for Saturn, that's the symbol for the conjunction, and that's the symbol for Uranus. And over here it shows you the date, 13th of February 1988. Okay, and it just then gives you the time relative to where I've drawn it for. I've drawn it for the Southern Hemisphere, so never mind all that. What we want to see is where was the conjunction. It was actually at Sagittarius, 29 degrees and 55 minutes. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of every single conjunction, opposition, and square that we are following, but I will just say a couple of things. First of all, this was the time where the Berlin Wall, excuse me, came down. Okay, huge, historical event. The Berlin Wall was basically deconstructed. That's what happened. That's the primary thing that happened around about that time. So that's the beginning of that cycle. Okay, and Saturn rules walls, and Uranus rules breakthroughs and things that get smashed out. Okay, and Saturn also rules falling objects as well. Okay, so that's the beginning point of this cycle that we are currently in as I speak at the moment. The next major aspect we want to look at is when is this transit of Saturn and Uranus going to form what's called the first quarter square, which is actually here in 1999. Now, in 1999, I looked at the history of what was going on in the world at that time, and there's about 31 significant things that took place worldwide, and some that is spread out around the world. It wasn't all happening in one location. But one of the very interesting things that took my eye was, let me just find it. New government restrictions on the use of internet is announced by China's news service. So that's obviously a very big event for China and the people in China. Now, I'm not going to go into any political perspectives, opinions, etc., etc. I'm just pointing to the highlights of what occurred relative to this particular cycle, because it is a cycle. When the conjunction of two planets come together, it is the birthing of a brand new cycle that will see itself through. First of all these aspects that you see in this particular window here, but the main ones that I want to draw our attention to today are where it began, where it had its first quarter square, when did it have its opposition, and where is it having its last quarter square? And that's what we're looking at today. So in 1999, as I said, there were numerous things going on, and one of the main things that took my eye was the control that took place in China relative to people's freedom on those levels. Okay, so that's the first quarter square. Now, if we continue to scroll down, what you'll see is that the opposition occurred, and this is quite extraordinary, in 2008. So what you're looking at here is, imagine that Saturn and Uranus were conjunct in the sign of Sagittarius. Then they start to proceed forward in their cycle. Saturn comes to, it'd be going this way, to square that cycle that began, which is the first quarter square in 1999. The opposition, have I got that right? Yes, the opposition occurred in 2008, okay, which was, let me just bring this back here, in the signs of Virgo and Pisces, okay. Now, why is 2008 significant? It's the most profound year for the entire globe, because that's when the collective global financial crisis hit. And 2008, Pluto also entered Capricorn. Okay, so that was the beginning of that. Certainly, the Saturn-Uranus cycle is also speaking to that as well. Okay, it's when Saturn and Uranus it's always going to be systems crashing. Okay, because Uranus just will not have a bar of what Saturn is trying to control. It's just old systems crashing down, pure and simple. So that leads us to where we are in the present. Okay, so after the opposition, let me just get a little. After the opposition, okay, so Saturn was up here somewhere, okay? Uranus wasn't in Taurus, but anyway, that's another story. As I said, they were in actually Pisces and Virgo, okay? But the point is that at some stage, Uranus got to being opposite Saturn, and so then 7 years on, okay, we've reached the Saturn square Uranus, which is called the last quarter square. So think about it like this: conjunction, first quarter square, opposition, last quarter square, before they actually come back together again to form a new conjunction, which is going to be a brand new cycle again. That actually occurs 2032. So it's quite a while away. All right. So I just want to really make some comments and some points about the meaning of the last quarter square. Now, the last quarter square, that this whole phasal relationship that we typically ascribe to the sun and the moon's relationship, that is new moon, crescent moon, balsamic moon, full moon, etc., etc. There are 8 phases, 8 distinct phases. These phases also correspond to any planetary combinations that begin with a conjunction, okay, and then continue in that cycle. So the concept of the 8 phases can be applied to any 2 planets, okay? So with Saturn and Uranus, we've now reached the last quarter square, which in Dane Rudhyar's terms was coined crisis in consciousness. Now, crisis in consciousness is a little bit, I don't know if obscure is the right word, but it sort of leaves people wondering, well, what does that mean exactly? And so this is what it means. First of all, the conjunction points to the birthing of new things. We don't know exactly what's going to show up then necessarily, but we are able to see that the Berlin Wall came down at that time. That's clear. The first quarter square, which happens after the conjunction, is called crisis in consciousness, crisis in action. So that particular aspect, that particular square provokes dynamic action on the external plane, like really intense action taken, okay? The opposition obviously brings about a level of being able to see where we are halfway through this cycle. What's happened during this halfway point? What have we accomplished? What's being created? What's being given birth to? What's happened through this halfway point? And now we are at because the halfway point is also illumination. The halfway point, the opposition, is the full moon. It's illumination, light, awareness, seeing. For better or for worse, we get to see it. It's all there. The last quarter square points to, as I said, crisis in consciousness. Now, this is very interesting to me because, well, for a number of different reasons, but the thing to understand about crisis in consciousness, it simply means that the crisis now in the collective, in the ether, in humanity, the soul of the planet, on everything, on everyone, is a crisis that is actually very much experienced within, because it's got to do with crisis in thought, crisis in thinking, crisis in perception, crisis in just the overall mental evaluation that we have on what we have understood up to this point. So the last quarter square it's a revision of everything that's been since this cycle began and what truly needs to be discarded. And so the absolute crisis is happening internally, even though it's being mirrored on that external level. And that's simply because, again, the old systems and structures are crumbling, destructing, falling apart. And the fuel in the fire that we are seeing at the moment, it of course comes from a number of different levels of other things that are going on, namely, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that occurred on the 2020 solstice, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we had in Capricorn. There's a lot of other layers of things that also speak to this larger cycle. But I just wanted to jump on really and just point to, we are at the reason we are at such critical times at the moment is because we are in the last quarter square of this whole cycle of Saturn and Uranus, which actually began in 1988. It's a long cycle, right? We've still got many, many years of it to see it through. So again, look, I just want to actually read just a couple of comments here about last quarter phase, some definitions. So in cyclic process, when the form has fulfilled the purpose for which it was intended and used up its store of vital energy, the movement is to let go of the obsolete dying form. The new seed that is forming must begin the process of severing itself from its parent plant. The keynote of the last quarter phase is that of reorientation away from what has already transpired toward some intimations of the future. The second half of the cycle, which is this, we are in the second half of the cycle, is geared toward the realization of meaning rather than the building of forms called for in the first half of the cyclic process. So the first half of this cycle, which again applies to the new full moon cycles that we have every month, right? The first half of the cycle is literally a building of sorts that's going on that external plane. It's creativity, creation, action, initiation on that external plane. And the second half of the cycle always speaks to a breaking down and finally coming to an absolute completion and close, which is when Uranus and Saturn will then come back together again and form an exact conjunction, which is years down the track. So we've still got a fair way to go, guys. Okay, so Ruggier called this phase crisis in consciousness because the crisis that occurs at the last quarter phase is not one of action, but rather one of thought. Based on the exposure to different information encountered in the previous disseminating phase, the evolving soul starts to question its previous beliefs and values. In light of this new understanding, it must begin to discard old ways of thinking and behaving that no longer work and do not harmonize or fit into developing consciousness. What has been built up must now be torn down. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the meaning of the last quarter phase. And that's what we are experiencing, all of us, on our own individual, personal level, and as a human collective family, speaking through the lens and the archetypes of Saturn and Uranus. So you can really apply that to so many different levels here. We primarily are starting with Uranus representing government systems, old structures, old forms, old ways of thinking, old values, etc. And Uranus representing the future, humanity, individuation, authenticity, and freedom, liberation. So it's no wonder with the square, which represents a clash of energies trying to occupy the same space, and they can't. There's naturally going to be conflict and clash, but the conflict and clash in the last quarter square has got to do with our own reorientation, with our own thinking, perceptions, and beliefs and values. And that's I also see that speaking to, for example, the concept of fake news, that has been a term that's used extensively now in any social media platform or news or wherever. That concept has become part of our language, right? And so that too has opened our eyes to the fact that largely a lot of information that has been presented to us that has somehow infiltrated into our own set of perceptions and values has actually been entirely misleading and deceptive and confusing and false. And so that's what this last quarter square is presenting. It's presenting the opportunity now to actually look at the whole larger cycle. What values and perceptions have we held as being a truth about reality, about our own reality, about our place in life, in our own evolution? And so what is it that we need to actually dismantle and discard so that we can actually experience a greater sense of authenticity within ourselves and a greater sense of freedom? Now, I know the contrast, which is the opposing paradigm at the moment, is very fierce and severe and forceful, and that's just part of the plan. It's just how it has to happen, and it is very difficult to breathe in it, and I completely understand. I feel the same as anybody else does, but I want us to try and stay hopeful and to continuously check in with ourselves relative to the old values and perceptions and beliefs that we have integrated, that are conditioned within us, that we've attached ourselves to, that we are hanging on to, that no longer can serve us moving forward. And that does mean really severing some things that we are actually quite attached to, including certain personal beliefs that we have. This is really, it's just real crisis time, and the crisis is happening in consciousness. Hence, the term for last quarter square phase is crisis in consciousness, which in basic terms means crisis in our thinking. Our thinking needs to be reoriented. Our thinking needs to change for our future, for the future that we are trying to create, and especially for the young people, children, people's grandchildren, people's children, and so forth, that they are going to be the ones that are going to steer the path forward, for future generations. And we'll come back again in the wheel at some stage. But a lot of us are here to facilitate that incredible transition that's happening at the moment. And it has to come through the entire collective as best as it can, because this is a collective transit that speaks to and touches every single human being. The influence and the impact is going to be seen through how people respond to this energy. It's the response that's going to matter at the end of the day, that's going to be the decider of how we move forward in the future. So again, I just want to say it's important for us to really stand with bravery and courage in these incredible, intense times of adversity and struggle and suffering, and understand that evolution is not an easy process, and it has waves that come through that are completely cataclysmic, and that we experience individually and personally throughout the course of our life at different times as well. Especially when we have a very prominent Pluto in our chart, our life tends to be very cataclysmic, but that is happening on a global, universal level at the moment. And so we all have a part in it, we all have a say in it. And unfortunately, and this saddens my heart, but I seem to be seeing a lot of just so much division coming from, well, I believe it's actually coming from fear primarily, and false information as well, and coercion and so forth. And it's dividing families. It's dividing people who have been friends for 20 years. It's really sad that human beings are not able to just let people be and respect their choice, whatever it is, but to not demonize and criticize, and in either side of the fence that you sit with this whole global situation. It's hard. It's hard on both sides. I get it, because both sides have the complete opposite perspective. But this is where the last quarter square is saying, reorient your thinking. Let go of those old, ways of seeing, those old values and old beliefs. What we thought the world was is not at all what it is relative to the information that has been injected into our systems through schools, through governments, through doctors, through you name it. It's there across the board on every single level. So what does that mean? That means that we need to take responsibility to become conscious and clear and aware within ourselves. Decide for ourselves. That doesn't mean it gives us the right to demonize and shame somebody else for the choice that they make, even if we don't like it or don't agree with it. But it seems to, the frustrating thing that I know a lot of you feel as well, because the majority are leaning towards one side, and it's always been like that, in this patriarchal 10,000-year-old system, there's always been this consensus state, which is 80% of the population and about 15 to 20% of the individuals or souls that would be characterized and defined by the individuated Uranus state. And there's always been this tension and clash between the two. But that said, the times that we are facing now are beyond what we can actually even conceive of relative to the future moving forward. We have to put our own judgments and criticisms, and really try and see what is the position that would speak to authenticity and freedom. We really have to really have to see that the tyranny, however you want to say it, draconian systems that are hanging on for dear life, they will be broken down. They will be broken down. So anyway, regardless, whatever position you take, just there's no need to just project hatred and crap on people because of the position they take. I've noticed that, since I've been quite vocal about these themes, in social media, I've noticed a few people have stopped following me, for instance, or, think silly things like that. And that doesn't bother me. It's just an observation that I've made. And this is how sort of ridiculous it's gotten. It's gotten to the point where, I've even heard of, celebrities, talking about they've severed friendships, people that they've known their entire life. They're not speaking to them anymore because they're not taking the path of in having the that liquid form inserted into a bodily part. So at the end of the day, we have all come from the one same source. We are all going to return to the one same source. This division, this egotistical bullshit righteousness is not going to help us. But coming together, rising, standing strong in love and unity, that's what's going to help us overcome everything and evolve as well. There's just no freaking time and space left for this crap that's going on with judgment and ridicule and exclusion and all this sort of stuff. There's no space and time for that. We all really need to work together. We really do. I don't know how else to say it. Okay. Clearly, I'm very passionate about these matters. This is the card that came up today. This was gifted to me. This pack of cards was gifted to me by a very special friend of mine. You know who you are. And when I opened the gift, this was the first card that was shown to me on the deck. Now, this is Archangel Michael. And so Archangel Michael is, for me personally, is an angel that I've been working with for many, many years. He's always with me, literally always with me. I feel so safe and protected when I tune into his frequency and when I call on him. And I'm telling you, when I call on him, he's literally right here. So he's right here, right now, standing behind me. I can feel him. I'll tell you a quick story. one night when I was having a really distressed, it could have been like a week or something like that. I can't quite remember those details. This was a few years ago now. I was laying down to go to sleep, and I was so incredibly distressed about something that was going on in my life at that time. And I just said to Michael before I went to sleep, I said, Michael, I really would love to just literally feel you sleep right next to me in my bed. I don't know if that's possible, but I want to feel your energy in the most real way, physically even, that I can. You know what happened to me that night? I woke up, and at that time I had no partner. Nobody was sleeping in my bed with me but my beautiful angel Coco. And it wasn't Coco that this incident transpired around. I woke up because I felt this body. I felt a body leaning on me, and it scared me because I knew that there's nobody else in my house. And so that was Michael. So the power of the angels is very real, very, very real. So I encourage you to work with angels. And finally, check this out. Rose quartz heart. Again, this was gifted by a very special friend of mine. You know who you are. This really took my breath away. And it's so heavy, actually. It's so heavy, which is ironically how my heart feels at the moment. My heart feels so heavy because of the amount of suffering that I am seeing going on collectively on so many different levels, including being, really worried about my family in Greece as well with the fires. So it's uncanny that this is so heavy, but I know that this beautiful, beautiful crystal is just totally and utterly filled with unconditional love, the abundance of love. The more we can raise our vibration, the more we can stay aligned with love, the not easier, but the perhaps the more supported we can feel in our own heart center. And I did read the Sabian symbol for the degrees of the new moon in Leo. So the new moon in Leo was at 16 degrees, and I read the 17th degree Sabian symbol, and it was mind-blowing, actually. It like, if you have the Sabian symbols book, check out the 17th degree of Leo, because it really is speaking to the exact volume of intensity of things that are rising collectively at the moment. And just where it uses the word religion and churches and things, just replace it with government and beliefs, and you'll get the message. And that's what sometimes you need to do with Sabian symbols, because some of the language that's used, sometimes you need to be able to really, open your mind and find words that fit within that description, but that would be better, a better replacement word, if you like, to actually define and describe what it is you're reading and what it actually relates to. I was just rereading again the other day the symbol for my ascendant, which is Aquarius, the actual Sabian symbol, and oh my God. I mean, I first read that Sabian symbol of mine for my ascendant about 25 years ago, and it didn't really resonate with me. I struggled to make the connection, and I just kind of left it. And I'm not saying this is the first time I've gone back to it since then. I have gone back to it a couple of times through the years, but it just seems to right now be so fitting for the point that I've reached in my own life, the work that I'm doing, and the message that I'm sharing. It's just so much my Aquarian ascendant from the Sabian symbol level. It's actually, it's really uncanny. So again, I urge you to check out Sabian symbols. They're very, very important. I was even looking at the Sabian symbol for the position of Eris in my chart, Eris, the goddess of discord and destruction, that we are seeing extremely present in our current time. So anyway, check all these things out for yourself. It's just so uncanny sometimes what the message that comes through and how it can literally describe, just a huge component of who you've been becoming actually, and perhaps where you've arrived at this point. So look, that's what I've got to say about the Saturn Uranus. And so we've still got, even though the last aspect occurs at the end of this year, which is still a few months away, and we can see the amplification of things. So we could expect a lot more, until we see this year through, and certainly into the next 2-3 years as well, to be quite frank. But let's just take it one step at a time. But holding the vibration of love, remembering this last quarter square has got to do with our own ability to basically break down old thought patterns, the way we used to think, the way we thought, whatever we thought about life, whatever we were fed. It's, unfortunately, a lot of it hasn't been true, right? So critical reasoning skills. Mercury's ingressing into Virgo in a couple of days, tomorrow, as a matter of fact. If I have time, I'll come back and do a post about that, a podcast. But it is only going to be in Virgo for a short time. So just for about 2 weeks. Just going to whiz through. It will be a very important time, though, with Mercury in Virgo. And I'm hoping that it's going to bring the best out of Mercury in Virgo, because Mercury in Virgo, rulership, it's his home sign. It's a very powerful place for Virgo, the most powerful place for critical reasoning skills, something that seems to be lacking. I'll tell you what's not lacking: love. That'll never be lacking. See you soon. Thanks for watching.